Welcome to the first episode of What's Architecture. The idea behind that is that you can be introduced to different architects and faculty, how they understand architecture, how they practice, how they perform architecture. So today, for the next one will be April 18th. Sorry, April 1st, take the 8th, the 1, by Judith Junk. So I'm happy to introduce today to Penelope Dean. It's the second time in my life that we introduced her. I think the first time was when she applied for the position here, and I was the chair of the committee. That was centuries ago. Penelope, now in my glasses, has a PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles, an Arch from the Verlag Institute of Rotterdam, and a B.Arch with first class with honors from the University of Technology in Sydney. So that means that she's Australian. So besides having all these degrees, she has 2 kids. That's why probably she arrived a little bit late.
That's nothing to do.
No. I'm giving a nice. Come on. I'm memorizing that. She's an architect and a writer who previously taught design theory at OSU, Ohio State University, you don't know, the Backhouse at Dessau, and at the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam. Penelope was editor of the Verlag Institute journal Punch between 2003 and 2007, and served as an editorial consultant for sub-magazines as Crib Sheets, Content, and Key M3. He's a registered architect in the Netherlands. Penelope worked with the Dutch office MDRB, and if you don't know this office, you need to check it and see the work that will help you to do your analysis. She worked in MDRB between 1998 and 2002. Her writings has appeared in several magazines as Long, Trans, Archis, Architectural Design, Architectural Record, and Crisis. Dean is currently working in a book entitled Delivery Without Discipline. So please welcome Penelope.
Hi. Thank you for the invitation and for having me. I'm actually going to throw this question into question by asking not what is architecture, but in fact, where is architecture? And this is a question that Le Corbusier asked in 1925 at the height of his backlash against décorative art in a book called The Décorative Art of Today. And the question was really about, well, where does architecture situate itself in relation to industrialization and mass production at that moment? I want to recuperate that question today because I think, well, let's say to very quickly maybe say what I think architecture is, and then to elaborate on where it is. I really see it as the intersection between the formal and the social in terms of ideas. And this intersection can play itself out in a number of different mediums and institutions and operations, and I want to show you 10 images where I find architecture to be either now or historically. And one thing you should understand is these images are simply sampled from a collection, my best of. They can be swapped in and out. There are no historical sequence. They jump across geography, period, time, and mediums. But what I want to show you is a snapshot in that sense of projects and artifacts that I really love because they exemplify a certain level of conceptual intelligence, a social idea that intersects with a formal one. They're indebted to ideas in the past and they anticipate ideas of the future. And above all, they're beautiful and they're exhilarating and they offer disciplinary insights. Okay, image number 1. Peter and Alison Smithson, House of the Future, which was a project designed in 1950 1956 to 1957. It's a one-bedroom house for a working couple. It's made entirely of plastic. It's designed at the very moment when the household appliance, and by appliances I mean refrigerators, ovens, washing machines and so on, are crowding out the domestic environment. So the idea of the house is for it to be designed like a car. It's designed as one thing, one complete component, and it has a limited role. In that sense, it's understood as a standardized product. And what you're looking at here is a photograph of the dining room with the courtyard beyond that, and which is an internalized garden. It's externalized but internal to form. And the significance, I think, of this project, even though it was never built, is that it presents a new way of thinking about the domestic object in relation to the lifestyle. So in contrast to modern architects stuffing interiors with appliances, this house takes the appliance as the starting point and redistributes them over the entire house. So it takes advantage of the flexibility and mobility of the appliance, and you can see a kitchen on wheels, and the dining table is actually conceptualized as an appliance. It comes up from the floor, so it goes up and down. And in this operation, you could say that space is actually produced not through walls or through a plan, but through an object, through an appliance, and it's produced around that object. So this is a shift in the idea of architecture as room-making to the architecture as space-making through the object. Second image is by an Italian designer, Ettore Sottsass. It was exhibited in Lino Ambas's exhibition in New Domestic Landscape in MoMA in New York in 1972. And he was commissioned by Ambas to design pre-prototypes of furniture. So these aren't furnitures per se, but pre-prototypes of furniture, and it's a series, you could say, of ideas about products which produce space. He described it as an orgy of plastic, so again, it's really embedded in the moment of new materials in the 60s coming into industrial design. And what's significant about it is that these components can be rearranged in different ways to produce different kinds of domestic environments, but the responsibility is really pushed on to the people that use the objects. It was imagined as a form of design without aesthetics, simply containers, and it was a way of looking for a prototypical solution for environments. So you could say here, if you ask where is the architecture, it's really in the creation of this notion of environment or a microenvironment, where the object is central to that idea. Furniture itself can become walls. There's no exteriority. And it's social in the sense that it addresses changing lifestyles. Number 3, love this. This is the bedroom that Adolf Loos, the Viennese architect, designed for his wife in 1903. Every surface, more or less, is covered with furry carpet. The carpet glides up the walls, the base of the built-in bed. Continuous pleated curtains wrap around the entire interior vertical surfaces, indiscriminately passing by the window, which is now relegated to a secondary condition. It doesn't allow a view, it simply allows in light. The bed and the dresser are covered with textile fabrics as well. So in a sense, this architectural design alludes qualities of comfort through different textures, plushness, and softness. So you might ask, well, where is the architecture and what seems to be purely decoration? Well, this is architecture conceptualized through a textile surface. What Loos would later theorize as the principle of cladding. This is directly indebted to a thesis put forward by a German architect and historian from the mid-19th century called Gottfried Semper, who actually claimed that the origins of architect were to be found in the textile dressings of interiors themselves. So in other words, architecture was not about tectonics, but was in fact about textiles and decor. So Loos is advancing this idea in this design. Semper also makes a distinction between architecture consisting of enclosed artifacts, so that will be people, and you can imagine they're all waiting for Lena Loos to walk in here and recline on the bed, the furniture and so on, and then the enclosure, which are the material dressings which wrap it. So this is architecture as surface. 1955, Bruce Goff, American architect, and this is a design for his Bavinger House in Norman, Oklahoma. It was designed for 2 artists. The plan of the house is a logarithmic spiral, so it looks like a snail in plan. It has no interior walls, but a series of floating yellow carpeted platforms which actually collapse floor, wall, and furniture into one element. So one of those floating pads would be a living room, another one would be a bedroom, and so on. In this collapse, you get suspended conversation pits, a single space with habitable zones floating in it. And then the materiality of the interior is rock, as kind of sandstone that he dynamited a few miles away from the building site. And the ground plan also contains plants and pools of water. So in this is a highly artificialized idea of nature. In that sense, it's architectural. But I would say the most important contribution of where architecture is located in this project is precisely in the idea of the interior, or the idea of designing an object from the inside out rather than from the outside in. And then the second thing I find completely fascinating is the contiguous nature of the landscape external to the house and then dragged into the house and being domesticated. You know, I don't have much really to say about this, apart from the fact that I think it's a really important image in a sort of certain legacy of architectural production that came after that, which involved the folded surface and the sort of organic object in relation to surface. So there's a legacy of projects that happen. I'm thinking of OMA's Cardiff Bay Opera House competition, which was a folded surface that then ends up in an overloy section in the 90s. But in any case, this is an image made by the Swiss architect Hans Meyer called Co-op Construction. It was made in 1926. His architectural interests were in purely objective design. In other words, all authorship and signature from the architect was taken out of the production, and the projects and the buildings only represented pure materiality, pure function, and the processes of the techniques that produced the objects or buildings. So what you're looking at is a glass fragment that's folded, 2 actually, and a real egg that's been mechanically reproduced in a photograph. And this was extremely radical at the time, the idea of mechanically reproducing an object that's biologically reproducible, like the egg is. But beyond that, what I find fascinating in this is the possibility that those 2 formal moves are already architecture independent of their material properties. In other words, form is as constitutive of the content of the shape of the egg, even though you can imagine the building doesn't contain yolk and egg white. So it's the possibility that that can become architecture. I don't know what I'm probably up to number 6. And I probably have to wrap it up soon. Jean Nouvel and Philip Starr, proposal for a Tokyo Opera House designed in 1985. This is probably a more obvious example of where the architecture is found, which is in the section. But what's, I think, fantastic in this project is the idea that the theatres, which are the 2 gold floating boxes, are suspended in a single interior, which becomes the lobby for the space, for the building. But that in fact they're turned inside out. So normally when you go into a theatre, you have no conception of what the outside of that thing is in the round. And this, by making them gold, actually produces the outside image of what the inside is made up of. So you could say here's a collapse of loose fit, which is the outside envelope, providing this figural void where distracted public space can take place, and a tight fit around the actual theatres where there is attentive public space, so people watching the performance. Okay, a drawing drawn by Ugo La Pietra in 1980. He was associated with the radical Italian architects in the 70s. This was actually an illustration that accompanied a statement by the Italian architect Andrea Branzi, published in Domus in 1980, which was called Inside the City. And what this drawing shows is a landscape of domestic objects, chairs, lamps, dressers, TVs, beds, toys, desks, lawnmowers, etc., that might be found in one's domestic environment today. So the Branzi statement is that by the 1980s, the designer has lost power and no longer organizes himself around design, but in fact domestic life, through all of the objects that we own, now arranges itself around design. So in other words, the individual objects of design are now liberated from a building, from an interior, from a house, which gives way to the idea that you can actually reimagine the entire city simply through the objects that you own, not public space, not private space, not mass, not solid, but objects. And so this is an example, I would say, of where architecture is purely polemic, and by polemic I mean an impassioned argument. And the polemic is really that architecture has, as we've formerly known it, has disappeared. And it's been trumped by the industrially produced object. Still in Italy, Aldo Rossi, a drawing he made of a coffee pot entitled The Return from School, dated in 1984. In this drawing, what you're looking at is a house situated by the seaside that has been projected onto his design for the coffee pot he made for a lassie in 1980. So in this sense, the coffee pot of the product has been architecturalized through added articulation to the surface of the pot, its interior and its base. So you see windows, lights on the inside, a parent waving from the inside, children with a dog coming home. So the coffee pot has finally, in this sense, you could say, become architecture. It's assumed the scale of the building, and its hollowness or the emptiness of the pot of the pot has become an inhabitable interior. I think the significance of this is this issue of type in architecture. I'm not sure if you're taking history classes yet, but the idea of type is a reoccurring trope that gets theorized and historicized in many different ways across the 20th century. But here, the coffee pot drawing reveals a product design conceived from the viewpoint of architecture. In other words, architecture involves a way of looking at things, but it's also then transformed into the image of architecture itself, i.e. the building. So Rossi's larger thesis was architecture progresses from the object to the city. In this drawing, you could also say, extend his argument by saying, well, actually, it begins with the product. And the product design escalates into architecture, which finally ends up in the city. Philip Scherer is a Swiss architect who only works in Photoshop. And what you are looking at here are images that he's produced of possible architectures, but they're not real. How does he make them? Well, he gets figments of photographs, and then he uses the diffuse, what's a Photoshop term? Diffuse command, so that the boundaries between all of the bits of images completely disappear, to produce these fictive architectural forms. So what you're looking at here is an imaginary architecture which is hyper-realistic. So in other words, there's extreme fiction with extreme photographic realism. The projects look unmistakably real. His attempt is to simulate real scenery, but also to maintain a conceptual and abstract nature. Oh, I've got it. Photoshop filters and flatten image commands. Okay, flatten images, obviously, filters, that was the word. So where's the architecture in this? The ninth point, I think this is my second last image, is the ninth point that is architecture lies in fiction, in the space of fiction, and the possibility of it becoming an object and the possibility of it becoming realizable. You might say, well, where's the social aspect to that? I would say the social aspect is precisely in the reception. In other words, how you as a viewer understand the image oscillating between the question, is it real or is it not? Is it fake? So that's the social component. And then finally, to something very recent that I'm actually working on here with a group of the MadCrit students in the graduate program, is the idea of the face, what is in the face of the architect. So what you're looking at is a series of covers that were designed by Dutch painter Emily van Hees, commissioned by Alessandro Mendini, who's an architect, Italian architect and designer and critic, who at the time was editor of Dauntless magazine, a beautiful architecture and design magazine. If you've not seen it, I highly recommend you look at it, especially the 60s through 80s. And you will see images here. There's Charles Jenks, American architect critic, lower right. Peter Eisenman with the pencil or cigar, middle bottom. Andy Warhol, top line, all in. Thomas Maldonado, Italian industrial design critic. Tafuri, second in from the left on the top row, and so on. So a series of faces associated with the field in the 1980s. So why does he put the faces on the cover? Well, he's really, could say, he's reinventing, he's repositioning the architect into an emerging celebrity culture, which is starting, which really doesn't take off until the late 1970s. It's not just the faces of the architects that he puts on the covers, but it's also that he, with that, writes a private letter to the architect as the editorial. So he reinvents the idea of the editorial as a personal letter in each issue. So rather than saying, dear reader, it says, dear Charles, dear Andy, and so on. And he uses that editorial to present different kinds of ideas and positions between him as an editor and what these leaders have actually been producing over the body of their work. So you could say that the editorial establishes an architectural discourse, which is about debates, disagreement, agreement, and so on. But it also presents a version of architecture which is beyond form, beyond technique, beyond materiality, but as a discursive cultural discipline. Another thing that we've kind of been looking at in the class is, well, what's actually behind the portrait? You could say what's behind the portraits here is our ideas of the hero. Architecture as hero, architecture as figure, architecture as personality. as the face behind the name, as the band leader. So to that I would like to add that architecture is also to be found precisely in signature, in authorship, rather than anonymous production. And it's also to be found in how one curates and assembles the content in a magazine. And that is where I am going to leave it. Thank you. Any questions? Would you like your face on the cover? How? The question was, how do you get your face on the cover? Well, it's usually an editorial decision, but I can relay a very funny story. Well, it is an editorial decision. There's a British architecture magazine called Blueprint, and they have a gossip section, and very sort of nasty gossip. And one of the things they published was this story about Peter Eisman going into Frank Gehry's office in Los Angeles, and Frank Gehry had his face put on the cover of Blueprint, and had it enlarged and framed and put in the office. Peter Eisman went in there and saw it, and then contacted Dan Sujic, who was doing a series of articles on Eisman in the next issue of Blueprint. Eisman contacted Dan Sujic and said, well, I've just been to Frank Gehry's office and I see that his face was on the cover of your magazine. I would like to be on it too. If you don't put it on, I'm going to take back all my work and you can't publish it. So Dan Sujic said, okay. And so it wasn't published. So maybe don't do that. Don't go and ask for it. That's it.